Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So hello, everybody. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Experts. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor. I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee, or in my case, ice water, because it's very hot here in Massachusetts right now, and let's get started. So if you're attending live, just a reminder that you are in listen-only mode. If you look at the toolbar, you'll see there's a Q&A section, so feel free to start putting questions in that. If you have information you'd like to share that's relevant to the discussion that we're having, feel free to put a comment in the chat box. If you're watching this as a recording, and I know more and more people are doing that, just a reminder that today is June 11th, 2025, and whatever we're saying today is true to the best of our knowledge. But things are moving even faster than usual at NIH, so please do confirm any crucial information that where you need to make sure that it's absolutely accurate. So what you should be viewing in the library right now, many of you looking at the names in the attendee list have been attending the live stream boot camp. So that is a 4-part live presentation. It's done in 4 consecutive weeks where I present Master the R series live and answer questions. So what I would suggest is you may want to either attend that live, and the sign up is in the chat box right now, or you can watch recordings of that or Master the R series. Master the R series, they update once a year, and I'm about to do the update in July. I think I'm going to wind up doing the Master the R update. So the boot camp is definitely the most up-to-date version of Master the R series. The pre-recorded course is a little over a year old, and as you can imagine, a lot has changed. So the boot camp is probably the most up-to-date version. So feel free to check that out. And probably you want to be focusing on Chapter 1 preparation primarily right now, because if you're targeting a fall deadline, you should be doing your prep steps. Any NIH updates? We talked, I think, at the last Ask the Grant Writing Expert about the notice that came out of over 50 NOFOs that were expired early, and in some cases on very little notice, because ostensibly because the NOFOs did not have updated scoring criteria information, so they didn't have the new simplified review framework. And therefore did not match what was in Forms I. I do have confirmation from several clients so far where the program officer has stated that the NOFO will be reissued this summer. So that would be for the CATS R01. So that I have confirmation that will be reissued this summer, so you'd be able to apply for it for the fall deadline. And the other one we have confirmation about is the BRG R01 is definitely going to be reissued this summer. If anybody knows of any others, let me know. It's been hard, of course, to get hold of program officers, but I would imagine that many of them, surely there are some other ones on that list that will be reissued. And I suspect there are some that won't be because they have language in them that's problematic for the current administration. So anyway, that is some of what's new at NIH. That's all I care to comment on at the moment. If anybody has questions about any other news at NIH, let me know and we will do our best to answer it. So I would like to welcome back our guest, Dr. Emilie Clemmens. And we are just delighted to have you back and to hear a little bit more about CDMRP and some funding opportunities there. So welcome, Emilie.
Thank you so much, Meg. Thanks for having me back. It's always a joy to be here. And thanks to all the attendees and those of you listening listening to the recording. And I'm going to try to share my screen. Oops. Okay, here we go on the title slide. So I'm here to give a quick overview of something different, not the NIH, and actually going to highlight some ways that this program is different than the NIH. So you may have heard of it, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research programs. And its title only gives you half of the story because it is, in fact, congressionally directed. As I'll discuss, Congress decides what's going to be funded in terms of topic areas, but it's the DoD, the Department of Defense, that administers these programs, and in the funding decisions aligns them to the DoD priorities. So a little bit about myself and why I'm talking about this. I used to be a scientific review officer, and that's the last bullet point on this slide. Formerly, I signed an SRO for CDMRP, so over 5 years spent in the peer review panels there, and subsequently founded my own grant writing consultancy, Artemis Editing. And I'm also currently Associate Director of Innovation in Health and Biosciences at the Kentucky Science and Engineering Foundation. And my background is in bioengineering. Okay, back to the topic at hand. As I mentioned, CDMRP gets its funding from Congress, but is administered by the U.S. Army. And since 1992, CDMRP has been given over $19 billion by Congress. And what do they fund? Many researchers have operated under the assumption that because this is a DoD-administered program or set of programs, that they're only interested in funding research that is relevant to the active duty military. But that is not, in fact, the case. What you see here is a list of previously funded research programs under the CDMRP umbrella, and you can see the wide variety of types of research that they fund, and can probably see a few that are directly relevant to active duty, but others that are not. Autism, scleroderma, pancreatic cancer. And I've also have in blue here their largest program, which is called the Peer-Reviewed Medical Research Program. And underneath that umbrella, so it's sort of an umbrella under an umbrella, there are a number of other topics that are funded by CDMRP. And I'm going to show you this vast list that was funded in fiscal year 22. So again, you can see the diversity of types of research that they look to fund. A lot of stuff that's rarer, like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, endometriosis, something you wouldn't think would be funded by the DoD, pancreatitis, pressure ulcers, plant-based vaccines. So a wide variety of different types of topics. So definitely check out the website to see if your research area is funded. There's a caveat, of course, for fiscal year 25, like seems all agencies currently, funding cuts have been enacted. The CDMRP budget, which was part of the appropriations continuation bill that was passed in March, its budget was cut 57% and relative to fiscal year 24. And so that large number of programs that I highlighted here has now been cut to just 12, at least for this year. You will notice that the peer-reviewed medical research program is still in there, and some of the programs that previously were standalone have now been moved underneath that program. So again, I would check the website to see what research that they are funding for this fiscal year, which may still be in there. But back to the broader objectives of CDMRP, and with this, wanting to really highlight some of the ways that it's different from NIH. So innovation and impact, I've bolded here. CDMRP was actually started because of patient advocacy. So patient advocates in breast cancer actually went to Congress, and they were frustrated with the pace of therapies getting to the bedside. And so they lobbied Congress for a different program that would be focused on high risk, high reward type applications, things that were innovative, perhaps that were deemed too risky to be funded by other agencies. And so that's how it all got started, and that's remained their focus since that time. So Congress, based on basically who lobbies them from the patient advocacy groups, sets the funding topics that will be funded in a given fiscal year, which, yes, this means that every fiscal year, those topics that are going to be funded can change. However, then DoD, once they have a hold of the program, of those topics and that funding, then they are going to enact some of their priorities around shaping which funding actually makes it through. I have a link here, and I can send this slide deck to Meg. to share. This is, or feel free to copy it down. This is a link that you can, where you can subscribe to their listserv to find out about upcoming program opportunities at CDMRP. Okay, so what types of mechanisms do they have available? This is not an exhaustive list, but rather a snapshot of the different types to demonstrate the breadth of types of research mechanisms that they have. So they do vary from the small awards, 200 to 300,000 over a 2 to 3 year period, for what they call either a discovery award or an idea development award. And these are really your wild ideas that are untested, that perhaps you have no preliminary data for. So a bit of an unusual approach. Then they have some things that are a little more standard. Your investigator-initiated research awards are similar to the R01s, funding more iterative research, although, as I'll discuss, that comes with an asterisk. And then you'll see some things that might be more expected. A technology development award, therapeutic development award, and a clinical trial award. So awards that are closer to the clinic, closer to the bedside. And they also fund really large awards to the tune of $20 million for multi-institutional efforts focused around a particular problem that they have identified as high priority, that they call the team science or focus program awards. Another one of the CDMRP priorities is their inclusion of consumer reviewers, and they have at least one consumer reviewer on every one of their panels that is in the peer review process. So these are patients or caregivers that are directly impacted by the area, the disease or condition that's being studied. And their input, they score what's called the impact criterion, and their input is extremely highly valued in the review process. So just as an example, I have when sitting in on the peer review panels, managing the peer review panels, I saw many instances in which the input from one of these advocates could dramatically affect the scoring. So for example, maybe the scientist reviewers felt it had a lot of high technical merit, but the consumer reviewers said, well, even if this is successful, the patients will not be interested in this type of solution, and that can change the trajectory of a review process. And I've seen the reverse happen as well, where they have like boosted an award that might not have otherwise been funded. This is a graphic from their website that demonstrates their sort of two-phase program cycle review, and there's a lot of information on there, and I encourage you to look at it and ask questions. If you have any specific questions about the process, let me know. I've circled peer review. I'm going to take a quick look at that in particular, probably because that's what you're most interested in, and then I'll briefly discuss what the heck programmatic review is. Okay, so for the peer review, what can you expect? One thing that's different from NIH, with CDMRP, there are no standing panels. So every time a solicitation goes out and they get a batch of applications to that solicitation, then that batch is handed off to SROs, the scientific review officers, who convene a specific panel tailored to the batch of applications that they have to review. This panel convenes only for that review and then is dispersed. And as we can discuss, this also means that there is not a mechanism for resubmission. So that is different as well. At CDMRP, you'll almost all of the applications require either what's called a pre-application or a letter of intent. And the use of these terms for CDMRP is such that if it's called a pre-application, it is evaluated and you must wait for a green light to submit your full application. If it is called an LOI, then it is just a hoop that you have to jump through. You must submit it, and that allows the SRO to start to have the information they need to convene the panel. But just note that those two terms are not used interchangeably by CDMRP. They mean different things, and that's important. Each full application is typically assigned to 2 scientific reviewers, 1 consumer reviewer, and then specialist reviewers as needed, such as a biostatistician or bioethicist for a clinical trial. And then when the panel meeting happens, each panel will consist of 5 to 20 individuals, and each application receives really only 20 to 45 minutes total of review time. So it's a very rapid process. That also that includes the assigned reviewer presentations to the full panel. Okay, so that's what that looks like. A quick look at programmatic review, what that means in terms of CDMRP. So big difference here with NIH, there is no pay line. So you might receive a wonderful score and still not be funded by the CDMRP, which can be frustrating. But here's how they do it. They take their top scorers, so the peer review does matter. They send the certain number of the top scorers in a panel to the programmatic review panel, which is a separate panel from the peer review panel. And then those applications are reviewed for alignment to the programmatic foci. So it's really important when you're putting together your application to make sure that you look very carefully at the solicitation, which they call a program announcement, to see what they list as their focus areas or areas of encouragement, because you really want to, hit it right on the nose and make sure that you are aligning with what their priorities are. Otherwise, even with a good score, you might not be funded. Okay, so what wins in peer review at CDMRP? Some of these bullets are true for any application you put forth to any agency. But the first one in particular, I want to note, in applying to CDMRP, it is extremely important, really imperative, to make sure that you have outlined a clear path to clinical impact. So whether you are submitting something for a discovery award, which is means you don't even have preliminary data. So how can, how do I know if it's going to be impactful? You have to be able to articulate what you foresee as that clinical path, all the way to the clinic, what it might look like. So at any stage of application, you need to be able to paint that picture for the peer review panel. Of course, you've got to have aims that address the hypothesis, and you've got to be highly organized, and it's got to be easy for reviewers to assess, because the review process is very rapid and they don't have time to really go searching for information that they need to evaluate you. But you also, as I already mentioned, need to make sure that you are starkly aligned with the goals of the program as listed in the program announcement, and that you show how your approach is innovative, because as I mentioned at the beginning, they are really interested in funding innovative work that's going to be that has a clear path to clinic and is going to be potentially groundbreaking or paradigm shifting in some way. All right, so my final notes for my quick overview of CDMRP is that CDMRP is not the same as NIH, so please do not recycle your application. You really do need to tailor it to DoD. As the funding has been cut for this agency as well, the process is going to be even more competitive than ever. So it is very important that you are sort of hitting these marks in terms of specificity to what the DoD might be looking to fund. As I mentioned, there's not a resubmission process. You do get a summary statement. You will get a score. One thing that I didn't mention, though, is that unlike NIH, there is no not discussed. If you make it past the pre-application stage, your application will be discussed and scored. So that's kind of nice. You do get a summary statement just as you would with NIH that will give you feedback about your application. And though there's no formal resubmission, you use that feedback to tailor your application for the next fiscal year cycle. An asterisk on that as well, that's assuming that your program and your funding mechanism will be there next year, which is not guaranteed. As with all applications, read the program announcement or solicitation very carefully and structure your application to match. And then my personal plug, of course, given the competitive nature of this process, as an expert on CDMRP, having been in the room and guided peer review through that process, I am available to help to address those common reviewer concerns. And that ends my quick review very rapid. And there we go. And now I'm looking for questions.
Yeah, just to remind people, Emilie's bio and contact information are in the chat. And Emilie, there are 3 questions. The third one is specific to your presentation, so I'm just going to read that. So does the proposed project have to include, this has to do with that clinical impact piece that you were discussing, and I have some other comments and questions too. So does the proposed project have to include the clinical work, or can it be for everything up to the clinical stage with clear impacts for a future clinical stage? I hope that makes sense. Maybe, in other words, can only clinicians apply?
So no, certainly not. To the last question, you do not need to be a clinician to apply. It never hurts to have clinical collaborators, however, clinical input at least, to this for your application. No, you do not have to have clinical work. As I mentioned, it really depends on the mechanism.
Yeah.
That you're applying to. So I mentioned those discovery awards, those super early stage awards. Those are really just, I have an idea and it's untested and it's unresearched and I don't have any idea, but I've got an idea about how I want to research it. And I can see how, if I can demonstrate feasibility, how this could move towards the clinic. How that's going to end up in the clinic, and then what kind of, can I articulate how significant the impact would be to the patient population? So you don't have to have the clinical work in a discovery. You're not going to be anywhere near like a clinical trial stage in a discovery stage. So if you're applying for a clinical trial, obviously you're describing some clinical work that you're going to be doing. Even in a technology development award, though, you might not yet be at the clinical testing stage. Some are, but some are not. Hope that helps.
Yeah. And that's true at NIH as well, where it can be very helpful to, even if you're doing a basic science project, your impact statement should have 1 sentence about a potential future application to health or disease in humans. There can be lots of dots in between the, where you are and where the translation is. It doesn't have to be direct. And you don't have to talk about it like in a paragraph. It doesn't have to sound like you're just pie in the sky, like just making things up. But there has to be, some potential application to human health. It's part of the mission at NIH as well. But sure. That doesn't mean that you have to be doing something that's on the brink of translation either. So right. I think that's true for both of them. So there are 2 more questions that are not pertaining to the talk. So before I take those, because we go till 3:45, I just wanted to ask a couple of different questions and point a few things out, comparing and contrasting to NIH. The thing that you said about pay lines, that at DoD, they don't issue pay lines. And so program staff may be selecting things based on their on the project's fit to their priorities and what they want to see in their portfolio. Contrary to popular belief, that is very much true at NIH as well. They do issue, some institutes issue pay lines, but it's not a hard and fast rule. And in the 2-stage review process, the study section issues the score and the council meeting is the one that decides on funding. And it's not simply, here's our funding line, everything below that is funded and everything above it isn't. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is to emphasize for the umpteenth millionth time that you need to do your homework, and everywhere, whether it's a foundation, a federal agency, no matter who you're applying to, figure out your funder's priorities and you fit your funder. You have to fit your funder. You can't just say, well, my science is stellar, and so of course they're going to fund me. They're going to fund what is their priority, and they all have priorities. Yep. So it's just yet another. I went into that at length yesterday in the boot camp, but it's kind of a big bugaboo of mine where I just want to emphasize that, because I think a lot of people, particularly when it comes to NIH, people think it's not true. It's like, oh, that's just the cutoff. And I will say that I got an email from a client yesterday who said, hey, have you heard about this expanded opportunity zone at NIBIB? And I'm going to drop this is hilarious to me. I'm going to drop the URL for this in the chat. So basically, this expanded opportunity zone, it says program staff may select a small number of applications that score beyond the pay line for funding consideration in each council round, and selection can be based on program priority, potential impact, career stage, et cetera, alignment with, their mission, et cetera. And I thought that was hilarious because that has been true at NIH since the late 1980s. So I don't know why are we making a fuss about this expanded opportunity zone? I don't know what to make of that. But anyway, it's yet another example. I put the URL for it in the chat, but it's another example where it's like, folks, you got to fit your funder. You have to fit your funder. And that means you got to do your research to figure out what their priorities are. And it doesn't matter who they are. If it's a foundation, a federal agency, your own university doing internal funding, what matters to them? You've got to fit what their priorities are if you're going to get money out of them.
And I would say that's one of the things that I help with. I like to help with, because I mean, we're all, as a researcher, you are naturally in the weeds of your work, and you just, like, the blinders that you have on, everyone is going to see how this is impactful, right? Yeah, right. Like if they don't, they're blind, and why should I have to explain it to them? Well, you do.
Yeah. I know. It's like sometimes I feel like people like us who are grant writers and editors, it's kind of, you're kind of like a translator almost. Like you have to help them figure out how to translate the greatness of their project into the specific language of a given agency. And it's really idiosyncratic, which is why early in my career I stopped doing other agencies, because I knew NIH so well, and I felt like other agencies could be really wildly different. So a couple of questions for you. How many applications are reviewed by a given study section, like a given review panel? I was curious about the load on the reviewers and reviewer fatigue that affects reviewer behavior in the review process.
Again, it depends on the size of they correlate the size of the panel with the number of applications. So there's more like a ratio. But in a standard panel, maybe 20, maybe 10 to 20, somewhere in that range.
So then a given assigned reviewer might get 6 or 8. Like how many?
They try to keep it a little lower than that. Yeah. Okay. But minimum of 3.
Okay.
3 to 5, but sometimes it does work out that they end up having to take on 1 or 2 more, depending on their expertise.
Yeah, I've seen an upward drift.
That may be true.
Yeah, it was like early in my career, it was maybe like 6, and I would say now it's not uncommon to hear people say, "Oh, I was assigned, maybe not primary on all of them, but assigned a reviewer on like 10 or 12." It could be a pretty staggering load.
That's true. There's probably an upward drift of number assigned, and then a downward drift of the amount that they're paying the reviewers to participate. It's not a good formula.
I'd cry if we weren't laughing. I have other questions, but there's another one pertaining to your stuff. What is the max % effort that you can request on a DoD grant? Great question. It depends on.
Oh my gosh. I didn't think I was going to get that one. It's been a long time. What is the max % effort? I don't know the answer to that. I feel like I need to
I'm guessing it's probably dependent on the NOFO. Like what you're scoping the project at, because I would imagine if you're doing a project that's 4 million and you're a PI on that, it's very different than doing one that's a few $100,000. So
exactly. Yeah.
So it's probably very dependent on the scope of the project.
I've got a couple open. I'm going to see if I can do a quick search to see if anything comes up. But,
and while you do that, I'm going to take another one that's not related to that. So I'll give you a moment to check that out to answer that question. So here's a person who says, I submitted a K99 R00 in February to NICHD Child Health. The study section is scheduled to happen on July 30th and 31st. It's a small panel called, et cetera, ZRG. It's like these are standing SEPs, these ZRGs. The SRO, the Scientific Review Officer, sent an email a few weeks ago to request post-submission material. I have a first author. Okay, so I'm going to pause there for a second to explain what post-submission material is. So this is a mechanism at NIH by which you can update your application in a very specific way and with very specific types of information. So you are allowed to submit one page as late as 30 days before the study section meets, and you can upload it once. So you really have to, I usually recommend that people wait until like 35 days before the study section meets, so that like you don't upload too soon and then find out there's something else you want to add and you can't. So there's very specific types of information that can be included in this. By far the most prevalent one is updates to publication information. There was, during the pandemic, you were allowed to update preliminary data. But when the state of emergency ended in, I think that was 2023, in like May of 2023, for most mechanisms you could no longer do that. However, for the R01, R03, and R21, you can continue to put preliminary data as post-submission material. So on your K99 R00, you cannot do that. So the questions go on. I have a first author publication accepted in press since K99R00 submission, which I plan to include in the post-submission material upload. Yes, excellent. We also collected some pilot data for my K99 phase, and I wonder if it's not permitted to upload the pilot results. No, can't do that on a K99, only R01, R21, R03. I've also won a Best Oral Presentation Award in a Premier conference last week, which I wonder if I can include this in my biosketch or other materials. Thanks. Well, you could in the future, but you've already uploaded your biosketch for the K99. If you have room on the one-page post-submission material, you could include that there if you wanted to. I think that's allowable, but you could look it up just to double check. But yeah, you can't like upload a new biosketch. It's literally one page that you can upload once as late as 30 days before the study section. So I hope that answers all of those questions. And let's go back to Emilie about the percent effort question.
I've looked at a couple of them, and I'm only seeing minimums, not maximums. I agree with your assessment, Meg. Of course, that it's going to vary depending on the
project scope.
The scope of the project. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything even in the CDMRP general instructions about maximum.
Okay, and there are two others that pertain to you. Do you have thoughts on deciding to apply to CDMRP versus ARPA-H?
My thoughts are that you should apply to as many opportunities as you can possibly fit in your workload.
Yeah. And let's
in terms of
you can apply to multiple you can't, for example, you can't have the same science in review at two different places within an agency. So like you can't have the same application at NCI and NICHD, but you can have similar applications at different federal agencies. So if there's something at NIH that fits, and then you can retool it to get it to work at CDMRP and get it to work at ARPA-H, do all three if you have the time and the bandwidth.
And then, as we've already said, tailor them to the listed priorities of the organizations. And then, of course, the rule is you just can't accept more than one federal grant for the exact same work, right? But you throw everything out there. CDMRP's been around for a while now, and I don't think it's going anywhere. I really can't speak to ARPA-H specifically, but I mean, just from that sort of the vibe check, I'm hoping it sticks around. It's an exciting program. It's pretty new though. So with everything being in flux, I mean, CDMRP is going to be there. Obviously it's getting hit by the budget cuts, but
it's not going.
It's not going anywhere.
Right. I think that's very consistent with what my understanding as well. Not necessarily true for some places. AHRQ, of course, has been on the chopping block since the dawn of time. So who knows what's going to happen with that, if it'll be absorbed elsewhere. And we'll see. But CDMRP is not going anywhere. As a follow-up, are instructors eligible to apply for CDMRP grants? So people not in a tenure track position.
That's going to vary by the solicitation as well. you're not going to see a clinical trial award. You're probably not going to see instructor eligibility there.
Yeah.
We have postdocs are eligible to apply for certain awards at CDMRP. So in terms of instructors, I haven't seen any specific solicitations that say no to that, but like it's probably going to be one of your earlier stage awards rather than your larger.
Looking at the CDMRP areas, I'm trying to figure out where a project on the microbiome involving gene editing would fit. Any thoughts? This may require somebody just going and looking. I mean,
Well, I think it would just be
it's a vast
the specific
yeah.
the specific disease area of focus would need. I think you need to, and you might find more than one for that tech. There may be there's obviously multiple clinical applications for that tech, so you can choose a direction to go in and see if you can find one that fits. But I would imagine there are several, even this year.
Yeah. All right. And let's see. Hello, I'm currently a second-year instructor in the immunology department. I don't want to say the organization. My PI has recently encouraged me to apply for an R21 or an R03 grant. So this sounds like NIH, but I'm unsure how much the proposed project is expected to diverge from the research I've been doing, especially since I've continued in the same lab where I completed my postdoc since 2019. I work on immunodeficiency caused due to thymus hypoplasia, and then they list several syndromes. So a second-year instructor, so this is somebody this is kind of, in some ways, a related question, right? It's a second-year instructor, so not a tenure-track person, I would imagine. So first, let's address the implied question of, are you eligible to apply for an R series as an instructor? And I know you've answered that for CDMRP, and for NIH, they don't have requirements for that. As long as your university is okay with you applying for that mechanism and they're willing to sponsor you and give you the space to do the project, and as long as you can demonstrate the expertise to do the project in terms of like your publications and your skills and background, then you can do it. They don't have any requirements about like what kind of position. So the question was, this person is unsure how much the proposed project is expected to diverge from the research I've been doing. So for the R03, it's probably not expected to diverge at all. That's not the intent of the R03 in general. So the R03, in almost all of its many iterations, there are many R03 NOFOs. Almost all of them are not meant for a situation where your work is diverging from what you've typically done. It's meant to be a small project. It's 2 years, typically 100,000 K cap in directs total over 2 years. So it's a pretty small project, and usually it can be like a very conservative kind of next logical steps. The R21, there are many types of R21s. There are the various parent mechanisms, but institutes often sponsor their own R21s, and you really have to look at the intent of your specific R21, because some of them have very strong language about it needing to be a new direction. So in that instance, it should, if that's what your NOFO says, it should diverge pretty significantly from the kind of work you've done in the past. So it would depend on the type of R21. And of course, all of this is, something to discuss with a program officer to get their take on it. Okay, I hope that was helpful. It looks like some more came in. Hold on a second. We answered that. I know I've been answering these out of order, so Riley's trying to figure out what to clear here. I answered the first one. We answered the microbiome one. The person said that makes sense regarding microbiome research. Thanks. For the instructor, can they apply for a K01 and or K25? This is a comment and not a... Oh, they can apply. For the instructor, they can apply for a K01 and or a K25. This is a comment and not a question. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. For CDMRP, are there project officers like NIH that applicants are advised to contact prior to applying?
Yeah, this is another difference that I didn't really discuss. The program officers at at CDMRP, they are DoD employees typically, and they are harder to get in touch with than you would say. Where at NIH, it's really part of their job is to communicate with the applicants. Sometimes you can actually contact the scientific review officers to ask procedural questions. But in my experience, that's not commonly done, and nor is there really a traditional mechanism by which applicants can ask, does this fit the purview? You can send that information. The program officers are identified for the individual programs, and you can send them an email with that information. It has just been my experience that they're not as proactive at communicating with applicants as other agencies.
Oh, Emilie, they're not very proactive at NIH these days either.
All right, another myth that I need to dispel, that I get out of my head.
But this is recent. It's kind of it's a bit of a wasteland there. So I've been some of my, because I postdoced at NIH, and like everybody I postdoced with, I think I'm the only one who didn't go on to build a career at NIH. I only worked briefly as a writer. The program officers, many of them have either retired or been told to retire. And the ones who have stayed are staggering under the difficulty and the workload and struggling to be responsive. So
I think I'd have to imagine the same caveat for CDMRP as well. I know that with the 57% cut, that staff have been let go. So it might even be more difficult to get in touch with people, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, and we have one more question and time for one more question. So I have a question for the early career reviewer program. So this is something I mentioned at the boot camp yesterday. I've heard that you need to have a funded NIH or federal grant before you can apply or be accepted. Is that true? What if I have a submitted and reviewed NIH grant but not funded? So the early career reviewer program is something that I highly, highly recommend. It is a program sponsored by the Center for Scientific Review, which is that separate entity that reviews most NIH applications, particularly most of the R series applications, although the current administration is proposing that they review everything, which is hugely problematic, but I've discussed that at other times, and I'm not going to get on that bandwagon again. So I pulled up the qualifications for the ECR program, and you have the qualifications pertaining to the grant are you have not held an R01 or equivalent, but you should have submitted a grant proposal as the PI to NIH and received the summary statement. So you do not have to have, you just have to have submitted and gotten comments back. You do not have to have a grant at all from NIH or anywhere, it would appear. And then there are other things having to do with you have at least 1 year of experience as a full-time faculty member, as an assistant professor or an equivalent, or an associate professor with ESI status, and then qualifications having to do with research, at least one senior author research publication in a peer-reviewed journal in the last 2 years, plus at least one additional senior author research publication. The qualifications, I dropped the URL in the chat. So they are pretty specific. And yet, I think most early stage investigators, early career investigators probably do meet these. But yeah, to answer your specific question, you definitely don't need to have a grant. In fact, if you're a PI on an R01, you're not eligible. So, and just to reiterate from what I was saying at boot camp yesterday, the big advantage is that you are actually participating as a reviewer in one session of the review panel, and you can see firsthand what it's like, not like a mock study section video that CSR puts out, although that's good too. They have really good videos, but this is a real one behind closed doors where actual applications are being reviewed and you serve as the reviewer. And I don't think in my entire career I have ever heard a negative comment about somebody who participated. Everybody who has participated said, wow, that was just so edifying. It really changed the way I write grant applications. It was just hugely helpful. So I strongly encourage people to do that. So thank you very much, Emilie, for coming. I love having you on. It's always fun to chat and see what's going
Thank
on
you.
in your neck of the woods. So I think that both CDMRP and NIH are not going away, thank goodness. But we're gonna have to weather the storm. There are some hard times
We're
ahead.
riding the waves.
We're riding the waves. Yeah, we're doing the best we can. And, again, like people like Emilie and me are very anxious to help people weather the storm. We're really both of us are trained as scientists. We both have PhDs. We're both extremely sympathetic to the plight and want to help. So let us know what we can do to help, and submit topics for us to discuss here. If anybody has friends who want to watch these videos, they are available on our open YouTube channel after a couple of weeks. So that's a free resource for people. And of course, if you want additional help, feel free to contact Emilie or me directly, and we're happy to chat. So signups are in the chat for registration for boot camp for monthly first Fridays, monthly office hours. So I hope to see some of you next Tuesday at our second week of the 4-week boot camp. 2 weeks from today, I'll be talking at Ask the Grant Writing Expert about rebuttal letters, which I've seen like everybody is asking for help on rebuttal letters. This is like a big upsurge in these, so I figured I would talk about them. And we'll have Emilie back to talk about CDMRP. So always really helpful to learn about other agencies. So thank you, Emilie, and thank you everybody for attending. And I hope to see you soon. And as the French would say, courage. Hang in there, everybody. Take care.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for having me. Bye.